Good evening, this is Goldie, also known as Mr. Anecdotal, Mr. Pasty, and the Talking Head. It's Friday, December 30th, 2011. Remember, most importantly, I rant so you don't have to. It's been a long time since I've done a live rant, and I'll be honest, I'm excited about it. Once I decided to do it, however, the idiocy of the 95 percenters came back into focus, as painfully as ever. In any event, a friend of mine asked me today what I'm excited about, and I pointed him to the Bernie Sanders website. He's a senator from Vermont. That's www.sanders.senate.gov. There was a link on Facebook to a Bernie Sanders interview talking about the need for a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, as corporations are not people. December 16th, 2011. It's called Brunch with Bernie. There was a Pew poll regarding disproportionate representation and income distribution. Sanders credits the Occupy movement for educating the American people, as shown by this Pew poll. He talks about the Citizens United decision as one of the worst decisions by the Supreme Court of all time. He believes it is a serious attack on our democracy. Anonymous campaign spending by corporations and any group is this attack on democracy. I agree. Congressman Ted Deutsch of Florida is a sponsor in the House of Representatives. I've put a good CNN link on there, and if you actually go to his website, you'll see several other links. You have the actual speech in the Senate and a 12-minute video there, but that'll be on the next email I send out. He's calling for an amendment overturning the Citizens United decision, which gave corporations and other groups, including unions, a free speech right in the form of anonymous campaign spending, declaring that corporations are people. If you go to those links, you will notice something very interesting. He sounds exactly like me. Our founders were smart guys. They used critical thinking. They sat around and debated, as opposed to arguing, which of course occurred. Through these debates, which I engage in with my friends, they learned. But they had no idea of the danger of the group. They feared the sovereign, King George, and all of his power. They'd be horrified with how much power our king has and how much constitutional power has been relinquished by the other branches of the government to the executive. I assert that if the founders had been confronted with large corporations and their power, and unions, they would have supported the Sanders constitutional amendment. In fact, they would have drafted the Constitution to not allow corporations and other groups to be people. They feared the other big corporate group at that time, the entrenched and powerful churches of England and Europe, and their power over actually life and death. Let me gloat a little bit. I spoke at an Occupy event away from the tent city downtown on November 17th, 2011. And I felt like it was a success, even though I had 5 minutes to write a little speech prior to speaking. I put the link in this that I'll send out next week. I apologize that I was not better prepared. I, in fact, had to write it on my BlackBerry. I was at a Thanksgiving celebration with some friends, and from their responses about Occupy, I remain convinced that there is something there, as the only thing they're all talking about is the stoned Rasta shitting on a cop car and the cleanup costs associated with the tent cities. Oh, and of course, there was my friend Peaches, who today came up to me and said, Occupy appears to be just a tent city, and there's no more protests. I don't suggest you say something like that to me on rant day. I replied that Occupy is about a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, and that the tent city is not the face of Occupy. I am the face of Occupy. My friend Bob is the face of Occupy. My friend Coop is the face of Occupy. My friend Randy is the face of Occupy. Please, please tell me, challenge me as to why a constitutional amendment overturning Citizens United will not cure 60% of the economic problems in this country by eliminating corporate welfare and crony capitalism. In any event, here's my redone speech, ready for any opportunity at any Occupy event, and with slight tweaking, any Tea Party event, if there are any more such Tea Party events. My name is blank. I don't have a cute little story, but I have a solution, an actual solution. I first have to ask, are there any Tea Partiers here or people who consider themselves constitutional conservatives? I'm a little disappointed that there are not more Tea Partiers and constitutional conservatives here, since some of these issues are the exact same issues that the Tea Partiers, and I don't mean Republican Tea Partiers, have. So if you were to give this at a Tea Party, you would say, how many Occupy people are there here? All right, back to the speech. People, corporations, and really all entities operate by incentives and disincentives. Capitalism is not the enemy. Capitalism allows us to be here today. It turns out that the regulators of capitalism are the enemy. It is up to us, the people, to properly regulate the system of capitalism. The problem is that, legally, corporations and other entities are able to donate as much as they want to political campaigns. This gives them the ability to call Senator Cornyn and have him pick up the phone. This gives them the ability to draft drilling leases, regulations, and tax policy. And this is not a Republican versus a Democratic problem. It's a structural problem that plagues both Republicans and Democrats. Obama is not the answer, and Mitt Romney is not the answer. Also, neither one is evil, as corporations are not evil. They all operate by incentives and disincentives, and it turns out that these incentives and disincentives have created a system of disproportionate representation in the United States. I have a solution that changes the incentives and disincentives that have created this disproportionate representation, and this solution can be and should be a unified message for all occupiers. It is an answer to the detractors of the Occupy movement that there is no consistent message besides the complaint that stone Rastas are shitting on police cars. Don't let them focus on that visual. This solution is required due to a Republican-appointed U.S. Supreme Court. This Supreme Court is pro-corporate, and only through a very strained and stained reading of the Constitution would someone believe that corporations are people entitled to a free speech right in the form of unlimited campaign contributions. Let me go through my placard, which also serves as my crib notes. Solution. I have a solution. This answers the detractors that the Occupy movement is an amorphous group of criminals without solutions. They're just complaining that they want their student loans forgiven and an elimination of capitalism. Constitutional amendment. We need to have a constitutional amendment so that a crappy pro-corporate Supreme Court cannot overturn something as simple as legislation. A constitutional amendment is very difficult to get done. However, I feel that if we were able to abolish and re-allow alcohol, then we can pass a constitutional amendment. Overturn Citizens United. Corporations are not people. This Citizens United case and its predecessors and progeny is the case that you hear about in relation to the creation of crony capitalism. And it needs to be and can only be permanently overturned with the constitutional amendment. Basically, and I mean very basically, this case determined that corporations are people and they're therefore entitled to the protections of the free speech portion of the First Amendment and the Bill of Rights. This free speech right then is used to disallow some portions of federal and state campaign finance reform laws, usually restrictions on amounts of donations and by whom or by what. Stephen Colbert has used this to form a super PAC. This super PAC would be allowed to run unlimited issue ads in a campaign. Just think of the anti-Obamacare ads that are now running on Fox. These issue ads are not candidate specific, supposedly, but of course they are. In any event, we cannot afford to allow a Supreme Court to override mere legislation. That's why legislation won't work. If we can get enough of the states together to pass this constitutional amendment, we don't care the makeup, sway, or just sheer idiocy of any future Supreme Court. Term limits. Thinking about incentives and disincentives, all elected officials begin their re-election campaigns the day the past election ends. They must raise money and do favors without it being a quid pro quo or actual exchange of money for a favor from day one in order to get re-elected. A single 6-year term is sufficient for senators, but increasing the terms for congressmen to 3 or 4 years would eliminate this, thus creating a class of citizen politicians. $100 donations only by human beings. A maximum contribution to campaigns of $100 adjusted for inflation by human beings only. This includes donating to your own campaign, eliminating the advantage to rich candidates spending $100 million of their own money. No revolving door for regulators and politicians. This is a very key part of the needed constitutional amendment and eliminates the wink wink nod nod question from Exxon to the regulators at the EPA or Halliburton to Dick Cheney of, what are you going to do after you leave the EPA? This leads to favorable legislation, regulations, oil and mineral leases, and tax policy. In fact, these companies always propose their own legislation. It's a key to the lobbying process, besides making the EPA regulation drafter's job easier. This will again lead to a class of citizen politicians or citizen regulators. Since they know they will not be able to go back to a job in an industry that they regulated, they won't be beholden. This is a solution, a constitutional amendment. Corporations are not people. Thank you. So that's the end of that speech. That's not quite the speech that showed up on YouTube. That's what I wrote afterwards that I would have liked to have said. It's kind of a jerk store. But in any event, next time I speak, I will be speaking that with some slight modifications. In the Austin Chronicle, December 16th, 2011 edition, Michael Ventura wrote an article, Occupy the Future. He writes letters at 3 a.m. He's really been on target for a really, really long time. As long as I've been reading him, he's on target. Quotes, many wonder what Occupy stands for and why Occupy has not made specific demands, as though it's not enough that, in Occupy's brief existence, its participants have emblazoned the difference between the 1% and the 99% upon the consciousness of America. As my longtime colleague Ginger Varney said, they've changed the conversation. It's not my place to speak for Occupy. That is actually my place. But I'll use my own people's mic. This is Michael Ventura speaking, to offer a proposal that Occupy demands a constitutional amendment to reverse Supreme Court decisions that have given corporations the rights of citizens. Carefully craft this amendment to make clear beyond doubt that a corporation does not enjoy or deserve the constitutional rights of a citizen. Rather, a for-profit corporation is a commercial venture subject to the Republic's laws governing commerce. This amendment must state, I normally don't have an audience, this amendment must state and enforce that corporations are not people. Change the Supreme Court's stance that corporations are people, and you change the fundamental rule under cover of which corporations conduct themselves. The passage of such an amendment would go a long way toward getting corporate money out of American politics. That would be a revolution. It would change the electoral playing field. In the election year of 2012, anyone running for any office should be made to take a stand on this amendment and answer this question. Do you believe a corporation should have the rights of an individual citizen? Yes or no? The answer to that direct and simple, but not simplistic question would indicate which side an office seeker is on, the 1% or the 99%. Thus, the 2012 election would not be about Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Tea Partiers, or Occupy. Instead, the election would be about one central crucial issue. Do you serve the 1% or the 99%? You can't call it class war when the class you defend is 99% of the population. Close quotes. It's a great article. Thank you, Michael Ventura. You have helped justify my almost 2 years of rants that came out of the BP oil gusher fiasco and worked its way to the need for a constitutional amendment. Any of you idiots that keep complaining about tent cities and Occupy cleanup costs are missing the point entirely. The protests are good for free speech. But the underlying problem is the crony capitalism and the danger to democracy of citizens united. If you don't get it, shut up. Some of you may remember that at the beginning, okay, I'll move on. Some of you may remember that at the beginning of the Arab Spring, the beginning was Tunisia and certainly Egypt. I stated that, at least in Egypt, that there would be more of the same. Just like I described Obama in comparison to Bush, more of the same. I stated that the military rulers taking over from Mubarak were the very same guys. I had some expiring miles, so I was forced to get a subscription to the Wall Street Journal. Here's a story from November 21st, 2011 by Matt Bradley and Tamer El Gobashi. Egypt's rulers step up battle. Protesters seek end to military rule, sparking violent face-off in Cairo ahead of next week's polling. This article talks about the protesters that are in Egypt now saying that the military has to go, as Mubarak did. Jon Stewart later reported that the elections occurred and the completely useless parliament was elected. They have no power. Only the military has power. There will be a second true revolution in Egypt at some point. The U.S. interest, of course, is the status quo and more arms sales to Egypt. The Wall Street Journal carried a story on December 30th, 2011 by Adam Enthouse and Stabham Groman entitled Tensions Rising Over Drone Secrecy. A relevant quote. Tensions are quietly increasing between White House and some congressional leaders over access to sensitive information about the government's use of drones in Pakistan and Yemen, officials said. The tensions come as groups such as Human Rights Watch step up pressure on the White House to explain its legal justifications for killing suspected militants, including American citizens, without due process. The disputes over the program have grown as improved technology has made drone operations easier to conduct, and thus more frequent. Now notice this messaging, quotes, CIA drones have killed more than 1,500 suspected militants on Pakistani soil since Barack Obama took office in 2009, becoming the most lethal program in the spy agency's history, close quotes. Notice they do not say Pakistani citizens or U.S. citizens. They say militants. While few U.S. lawmakers question the effectiveness of the targeted killing campaign, some top lawmakers complain about what they see as excessive White House secrecy, about how targets are chosen, and how the administration justifies the killings, particularly of American citizens. Further on is an interesting quote, quotes, John Bellinger, a top legal advisor for the State Department during the Bush administration, said the White House needs to start thinking about a legal framework that would define acceptable practices. He pointed to the risk that other countries will start using drones in ways the U.S. might find objectionable. If Russia starts using drones to go after terrorists, will the U.S. look like we have a double standard if we criticize them? What about if Mexico started using drones and flew those over Texas? How would that look? On December 27, 2011, two idiots were sitting in for Jeff Ward on KLBJ AM in Austin. A Ron Paul supporter called in and talked about civilian deaths from drones. These two idiots responded that these people live in a war zone and collateral damage occurs in a war zone. Well, let me tell you about war zones where we have undeclared wars, as in Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Kuwait, Algeria, Egypt, Libya, Yemen, Somalia, Seychelles, and Djibouti. Basically, everywhere we have troops or drones, we are conducting an illegal and unconstitutional and unconscionable war. So, I've talked in the past about, I use unspecified numbers of undeclared wars and the use of these drones. We go where we want. And where we want is where the corporations tells us to go. Where the corporations tell us to go, So if we need Libyan oil or Iraqi oil, the companies that benefit from that and donate call the senators and call the president and tell them we need to go there. Then they find a reason that can be used to justify. There's a Libyan crackdown by Gaddafi. The Syrians are killing people. Whatever you want to come up with. There's Islamic militants. It's dangerous in Iraq. Iran is dangerous. We are conducting a war in Iran. In Iran. And this is the Citizens United problem. If we did not have corporations that could donate to these legislators, it would be much more difficult for them, or at least there'd be less of a reason for them to go into these areas and send our troops and drones and kill babies. Because that's what we do. We kill babies. And I had an argument, I've talked about this before, I had an argument with a Democrat down in Costa Rica. A buddy of mine brought her up to me, and we started talking, and it was when Libya had first started, and she was okay with it as long as it's our guy doing it, Obama doing it. Well, let me tell you, Obama is a lot worse than Bush on the number of wars that we're in. A lot worse. He is not the solution. The overturning of Citizens United is a part of the solution. Incentives and disincentives. That's what people operate by. Corporations dip into their corporate treasuries and give as much as they want to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, who bundles up the money and buys the anti-Obamacare ads. That's what they do. That's their incentive. They have to do it. They have to do it. Exxon needs the contracts. So they give the money. They have to do it. That's the incentive. We must overturn Citizens United. It will eliminate a bunch of undeclared wars. Because as you know, our imperialistic interest, the American imperialistic interest, is different than these corporations' imperialistic interest. What's good for Exxon used to be good for this country, or at least for leaders in this country and rich people in this country. Now it has nothing to do with that. But still, we act as though it is. These corporations are basically stateless. And they get us to do their bidding because they pay. Pretty simple. It's not a difficult concept. If they pay, we do what they pay for. It's easy. All right. I was in the secure location recently. A friend of mine sent me a link to an article of something that had occurred recently in Costa Rica. And it's InsideCostaRica.com, Costa Rica News. It was an October 25th article. Costa Rica, I'll read it to you. No criminal prosecution for possession of small amounts of illegal drugs. Christmas is coming early for those found with small amounts of illegal drugs in their possession. For the goal of a new program is to minimize criminal prosecution in such cases and reduce costs to the judicial system. The program is possible by an agreement between Ministerio Público, Seguridad Pública, and Organismo de Investigación Judicial, Judicial Police, to not bring to trial any person found with small amounts. What constitutes a small amount was not disclosed. Under the plan, prosecutors will treat the carrying of small amounts of drugs as a non-criminal offense unless there is suspicion of trafficking or there is an intent to sell. The decision to take a tolerant attitude to the problem of possession of drugs in small amounts, most likely for personal use, is that it costs the judicial system 307,000 colones. Divide that by 500, so that's $6,000, I believe. $6,000 to bring each person to trial, which in the majority of the cases ends up being dismissed for lack of evidence. In 2010, there were 125,000 such cases. Under the agreement, the drugs will be seized and handed over to a receiving office and will become the property of the OIJ and the suspect released. In a lot of the cases, it's expected that the person will not even have a record of the arrest and or seizure. All right. Late November, we had a bonfire and we're hanging out in one of the finer bars in the secure location. And some friends showed up and said the DEA had a roadblock at the corner near the bus stop. We later heard that they had dogs and already had about 50 ticos, the name of locals from Costa Rica, locked up in jail. Now there are two very large problems with this. The first is the discussion about the slippery slope and the rule of law and the erosion of the right to be free of unreasonable search and seizure in the U.S. The second is that inconsistent policing is a failure of civilization. If you were brown, they took you down. All right. Inconsistent policing means they did not search me. I told you about this about a year ago when they came up into the bar. They bypassed all the white people. They only rousted anybody who was brown. Now, inconsistent policing is a symptom of a dictatorship, a dangerous dictatorship. When police have unlimited powers, and we just heard that they have passed a law on small amounts of drugs. You won't even get taken in. Well, they took in 50 ticos, including a few friends of mine, because they didn't have a passport copy, or whatever ID they have to carry down there. I always carry a copy of my passport. I don't carry the actual passport, because it can be stolen. Remember back in the 60s, there was a program called COINTELPRO. The FBI ran it. They decided any activist was a danger to America. And they started doing illegal surveillance, illegal wiretaps. This was part of the dictatorship of the Nixon administration, although it started before him. It was a terrible, terrible time in our country. And people that see and participated in it, lawyers that defended people, they got on the list. It was like a blacklisting time. This is what happens with inconsistent policing. Unchecked police powers. Unchecked executives. Unchecked NSA. Unchecked FBI. The inability to actually sue the FBI when they come in and do a sneak and peek. You're not even allowed to bring it up. That's what the Patriot Act says. It allows for brutality, physical and mental. The locking up of bank accounts. The checking of your tax records if they don't like you. It's all under the guise of terrorism. And in Costa Rica, I don't even know what it was in the guise of. But all it led to was racial profiling by the new cops that came into town. And it sure didn't feel like a vacation town. People went home. And those cops made a lot of money. They made a lot of money. And it was your tax dollars through the DEA that paid for that. They don't have an army. It's a protectorate. We protect them. Runs from the Atlantic to the Pacific in Central America. A protectorate. They do what we tell them. So the price of certain thefts, and there was actually a murder over a laptop, supposedly. The end result of that is an increased police presence with inconsistent enforcement by them and racial profiling. So let's talk for a second about some of these immigration laws that are being passed in the United States, where they ask, "Valha papers." Are they going to ask me for my papers? No, I'm white. If you're brown, from India, from South America, from Africa, how do you not profile in that situation? Of course they are profiling. Even though the laws say, the Arizona immigration law says, you cannot racially profile. But that's the only way you can do it. They're not checking everybody's papers. That's the effect of these types of laws and inconsistent policing and laws that are impossible to enforce without profiling. It's impossible. And we do not live in a country where we allow racial profiling. That's the country we have decided to live in. No racial profiling. I don't care if you have a Muslim name. That's the risk we run. To have some freedoms. You run risk. We take risks all the time. You cannot eliminate risk. You're not going to be able to catch all of the terrorists, ever. You're not going to be able to catch all of the illegals, ever. It can't be done. You want to do that? Go to Russia, where they can stop anybody. Or go to Costa Rica, where they don't have a Fourth Amendment. If you like that kind of behavior. Not here. Not in Arizona, not in Texas. Not in Florida. So that's the example. It's the metaphor of what it will be like and what it is like if the Supreme Court supports Arizona's immigration laws. You can't do it without racially profiling. It can't be done. All right, prior to flying back from the secure location, I stopped getting some emails from my Google account. I went in to look at the emails directly on the Google website and found that my password stopped working. Maybe I forgot to remember the new password. In any event, when changing it, the program asked me a question that startled me. It was a security question, and it asked me, which airline flew you for free to Costa Rica? I was originally on Delta, and when that flight was delayed, I flew to Dallas to catch an American flight from Dallas to Costa Rica. Since it was a maintenance issue, they had to transfer me to another airline for free. Anyway, I caught the American flight and got to Costa Rica 50 minutes later than the original Delta flight. Well, I had communicated with a few friends via Gmail. How did Google know that I flew on American or that I was flying anywhere at all? I've ran it for almost 2 years on the erosion of the right to privacy and the fear of the slippery slope. I joke half-heartedly with my friends about how the NSA is watching and listening to everything. Some call it paranoia, even though I say it's not paranoia if it's real. I've told a few people about my experience here with this Google question, and most responded that in my Google agreement, I agreed to let them read my emails. I don't remember reading that disclosure, and to be honest, I don't think anyone else realized that Google was reading all of their emails. And I assume all items you leave on the Google, on Google in the cloud. Which, that would mean client files? I mean, how do you do that and maintain confidentiality if you're a lawyer? How do you do that? How do you work with the cloud? How do you send emails via Gmail if Google's reading them? That's a good question for lawyers. Anyway, I've talked for a couple of years about our lack of privacy and the erosion of the expectation of privacy, but I never thought that they would be so out about it. As we all expect less privacy, it actually becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, as can be seen by the responses I've gotten from people about this intrusion into my emails. All right, in watching the news over the past few weeks, besides completely understanding that everything we see is purely for the November 2012 elections, which is, by the way, the reason I stopped doing these rants. I couldn't watch Fox for after October. I noticed an increasing concentration on Iran. You may remember when bin Laden was extrajudicially lynched, or at least we were shown that photograph. I stated that there would be a new bin Laden, a new Goldstein in the tradition of the book 1984, and there was, al-Zawahiri, who was later extrajudicially lynched also, even though being a U.S. citizen, as well as his son, who was also a U.S. citizen. Well, it looks like the next Goldstein is Iran, at least for now. This is justification for a huge arms deal between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, obviously benefiting a few corporations due to Citizens United donations. Again, Citizens United. It's everywhere. Whoever wants business and is regulated, which is everyone, has to donate. If you don't donate, you get nothing. Simple. Incentives and disincentives. Citizens United, overturn it. Remember prior to the last election, the last local election, I called out that bonds equals taxes, no more lies, vote no on all bond issues. Well, nobody got the hint, and all bonds passed on November 8th, 2011. I don't want to hear another idiot complain that their property taxes are too high. I just mean locally in Texas or here in Austin. Because they voted for parks and expansion of the hike and bike trail and blah, whatever. Being told that it would not raise your taxes by our elected representatives. Lies. On November the 9th, 2011, the Republican Party held a debate and everyone attended. I attended a party on November 10th, 2011 that contained a few Democrats. As usual, these Democrats did not watch the debate. I feel sorry for them because I have exclaimed that these debates and this portion of the election cycle is purely entertainment. Besides that, Jon Stewart is on this shit. On Jon Stewart's November 10th, 2011 broadcast, the ultimate was attained, but only for those of us that watched the debate. It is the funniest piece of comedy by just relating what happened in modern history. I cried. I had to pause it. I was laughing so hard I was crying. Don't ever miss another debate. And then watch Jon Stewart the next day, because it's well worth it. I want to apologize for Rick Perry and my prediction that he would be the next president. I neglected to remember that he refused to debate Kay Bailey Hutchison in the last race for governor of Texas. He's been elected 3 times, by the way. Only when I watched the Republican debates did I realize what a buffoon he is. I didn't know. My roommate who watches only ESPN could have done a better job. Actually, our cat, his cat, could have done a better job. I want to spend a tiny amount of time at something good in the world, and that is the Enlightened Warriors program. It's in Austin here. It's an after-school program for at-risk kids. It's working, and they could use your help. It's at www.successfulboys.com. I went to a celebration and auction. It was a fundraiser, and met most of the boys. They were incredibly polite, is what I noticed. That was the most incredible thing. These guys were just shake hands, introducing themselves, just very, very polite. The guy that runs the program does not take any crap from any of these kids. They do sports, including martial arts, and it keeps them out of the gangs. They perform musical numbers. They did some musical thing. It was great, and the money goes directly to add more boys to the program. So when you get this link, please check it out, and if you got some money, send it to them. That's all there is today. I want to thank our sponsors, all of which support this form of conversation, but not necessarily the content of this conversation. PianoByAngelo.com, Angelo Limbesis, who teaches and plays keyboards all over Austin. ZetaDesign.com for all of your decorative painting needs. You can make anything look like anything. AustinAreaPlumbing.com for all of your Austin plumbing problems. www.ticoadventurelodge.com, a small hotel in Samara, Costa Rica. CNC Surf School in Samara, www.cncsurfsamara.webs.com. By the way, Charlie makes unbelievable handmade putters. Well, he made me one. La Vela Latina, a great sunset bar and restaurant in Samara. Ambar Tequila at www.santospirits.com, an extremely smooth tequila. Another cool 4-unit green hotel in Samara called The Logan at www.thelogansamara.com. And of course, the Delicate Genius in Houston, who is a platinum sponsor. Thanks for coming out.